before we start on questions, I also wanted to give people sort of a quick frame on what I'm thinking about for legislation, because a lot of the solutions that I think would come out of the kind of things that Paul and Louis and Chris and a lot of the responses that Tricia have are things that aren't going to happen with one bill. They're things that are going to happen as an evolution over time. As Louis is saying, you've got to get that sort of behavior change to happen. You've got to get people to realize the problem is there. And as Paul said, you know, partly we have to learn from the crises as they come a little bit too. But what I really think my bill really looks to is really a planning document. It really tries to set in place the infrastructure to plan for the crisis that we're talking about, to get ready to say that when something does get knocked down, how will we rebuild that at the other end of that, not to suddenly then just have to react and say, you know what, we're just going to build it back the same way, but instead really thinking about that and helping hopefully also to deal with our human nature of being anecdotal and not being inclined to think in 50-year terms. We're much more willing to think in terms of what have we already seen and, you know, what can I do in the next year or 2 or 5. It's very hard for us to think in those longer terms. So it really does try to do that. And by doing so, it really tries to also help government, the state government in particular, know what the left and right hand are doing, really trying to consolidate a lot of the work that's already, the great work in many cases that's already happening throughout our state agencies, but trying to get everybody kind of working the same way, working together, doing vulnerability assessments, looking for opportunities at commerce and things like that for our economy. So there's a fact sheet that's around on the chairs here, but that bill I'm anticipating introducing this week. We've already, for folks that don't know, we were given a little extra time because of the snow day before we went on break. So I do have a couple more days yet to get that bill in. And yes, that's right. Yeah. But let me actually one more thing. I want to also thank members that are here, House members that are here now. I've seen Representative Peter Martin from Newport, Representative Larry Valencia from Exeter and West Greenwich, Representative Dave Bennett from Warwick, and a teeny bit of Cranston. And we also have, Scott Guthrie, I see from Coventry, and you're just all Coventry, right, Scott? I don't know if I missed any other legislators in the room. I can't quite see straight to the back, but I know a couple other folks have been coming in and out as well. And we have folks from a lot of different state agencies, and I'm also anticipating a lot of folks having the opportunity to see this on Capitol TV, so I appreciate them filming this today. So let's jump in and give people an opportunity to ask questions to get some sense of that. Not necessarily about the legislation. If you want, we can talk about that a little bit, but I think a lot more will be gained from talking to the panelists about the depth that they're offering us on these topics along the way. So any questions that folks have or comments that folks have around these things? Oh, Representative Bennett.
I have the same question in my mind. Why do you rebuild basically that already been destroyed? You know, why sit down in Wesley and West Warwick, they build it right back the way they were. So the next one that comes along, they'll take it out. I don't understand that.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, you're talking about one person at a time, Rep. I mean, you know, that's the challenge. If somebody's got their own piece of property, their own building, or their own home, and they want that back right there along the way, I think part of the struggle we'll work on the planning is helping people have solutions in some cases to, if they are going to rebuilding back in a more sensible way. And in some cases, maybe somebody's not, that's not the right place to be anymore, because we're going to see this keeping on happening over and over and over again. And that's why, like I said, this is a lot less about presupposing what the right answers are, but really a lot more about, for me at least, about that planning and about that measuring and looking and constantly adapting too. Adaptive management is a piece of this too, to really know that. I've talked to engineers that get really excited about their change they've seen in their own, you know, their sort of own personal experience. Engineers are very accustomed, I think, and I don't think it's a negative thing, I think it's a good thing, to saying that this is the way the problem is, so this is the way the solution is supposed to be. But unfortunately, for the reality of things is things aren't continuing to happen the way they had happened. Everything keeps on changing, and so we need to be able to also respond and adapt. And I think that's one of the problems, is we're used to just rebuilding when something gets knocked down.
Yeah, I will say that at least particularly in the coastal context, we've been seeing a number of class action lawsuits under takings law around the country, where folks are told that they can't rebuild after a severe erosive type of event, and that's something that coastal managers in particular are concerned about and looking at. CLF is spending some time, as is Roger Williams University, working with CRMC, trying to understand takings law in that context. But I think that the other piece to this is that we aren't, and this is probably more to Lewis's realm, we aren't providing the type of incentives for people to change the way, to change behavior post-disaster. And we can look at that at the very individual level, and I think, CRMC is trying to do that by challenging the FEMA flood maps as not being adequate projection of risk. But we can also do that as a state, I think, at a higher level through the policies that we ask our agencies to consider post-disaster. So, what types of boxes need to be checked off before you go back and put a parking lot where you should have put a garage. Maybe you don't eliminate any number of spaces in doing that. You just create an opportunity to get a new design in there that allows that place to be more resilient. So I think it's a combination of some of these, leaders like FM Global with using insurance incentives, using other types of market-based incentives to get people to change behavior, and then just having to deal with it time and time again. At some point, the cost of public expenditure in rebuilding is not going to be outweighed by just saying we can't do it anymore.
Lewis, did you want to add to that piece, and then I'll let Paul jump in too?
Yeah, sorry, I'm losing my voice this afternoon for some reason. I guess there's a couple of points here. One is that if public policy is such that land use decisions are not made at that level, then it's up to individual homeowners and business owners to do the right thing. And if they choose to rebuild at the same site, which is not always advisable, their options are either to make modifications to that site or to make extensive improvements in the way they design that job to mitigate the hazards that they're facing. So obviously, sometimes it means raising, sometimes it means providing adequate drainage. The solutions depend on the hazard that they're facing. The one benefit of those scenarios is that those solutions are easier to implement during a construction or a complete rebuild than they are to do to an existing facility that you're retrofitting. They're very expensive during a retrofit. But when you're rebuilding, those solutions are much easier to implement. And one of the things that we offer as a company is we offer what's called a green policy, to where if a client experiences a loss, they can rebuild, and as long as that rebuilding is done to a way that improves their sustainability. And sustainability doesn't just mean energy reduction or reduction in emissions. It means it's going to be there through those storms. Then there's an increased benefit to them in terms of covering those costs. So there are solutions but the most important thing that you brought up is not to go back and say, we're going to put the exact same thing in the exact same spot. You're going to get the exact same outcome.
Paul, did you have something?
I think the state actually is starting to take a really interesting role in that. With the 2016 new comp plans that will be coming forward, hazard mitigations are actually being utilized. I think Wickford is the first test case for this, but hazard mitigation is being put in as part of our new comp plans for all the communities. For Newport, we're looking forward to starting that process because I think you start then to build the conscious awareness of what this is and hazards and the mitigation, the environment is being very, very important into the longer term comp plan and they're able to rebuild and future build.
Representative Martin.
I have a question for Paul. Last time we had a flood in Easton's Beach, the beach ended up going through the building, wiped out the Save the Bay Exploratorium,
Right.
and they almost breached the seawall. Talk to me about what happened when they rebuilt the beach, because the mechanicals used to be in the cellars
Right.
of that building. What was done to prevent any further changes? And by the way, did an insurance company pay for those damages?
That I actually don't know. I'd have to get that information to you directly. What we do know about that, what we learned is, particularly when you talked about the berm across the road, across from the reservoir, that is the area of massive concern. Because, as I said earlier in the presentation, not only is that an escape area, behind that is basically part of our water systems. And, and that's where that berm, and at one point people kept saying, well, it wasn't breached. Well, a dumpster ended up on top of the berm. So it's like, well, you were lucky, and that wasn't even a Category 1 when Sandy. So I can get that other information about the actual, what took place at the beach area itself. I can get that to you afterwards. I don't have that information about what they did in the rebuild.
I just wondered if we learned, because I was in the building after it was flooded, it was full of sand.
Right.
And I just wondered when they rebuilt it, did they move the furnaces and everything up above the...
That I'll find out for you. One of the things that we're actually doing, working with CRMC and CRC, is actually the engagement on what lessons. In fact, on March 4th, we'll be having a presentation on lessons that we've learned, particularly on the waterfront. We have two from Bowen's Wharf that are talking about what happened in the three events, what did they do in the immediate aftermath, and what are they doing to prepare for the future. So we're doing the public engagement, but I'll get you the information about the actual facility.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Paul was saying, I mean, is it 60% of the water supply is there, or 40%? It's something. It's either 60 or 40. I can't recall.
I think it's 40,
and that's also used by businesses for their industrial purposes, I'd imagine, for cooling machines and that sort of thing, just like any other.
Right.
Usually that's where the drinking water. So is one of the other things, back to what Lewis was saying, to remind people that FM Global can only help its clients so far in terms of, protecting themselves. In the end, the state and the municipalities, it's all going to, it needs to be a team effort in that sense, because in the end, if that water supply had been basically washed out to sea, where would the businesses that needed that water be able to reopen and start working again the next day? What would have happened to all the residents along the way too? I don't want to understate that either, but we do want to make sure our economy is resilient along the way, and that's why this isn't just a one company at a time, one house at a time kind of an answer to these kinds of problems. And I am confident. I've been meeting with people for many months about their thoughts about this sort of thing. I think there's a component part around carbon mitigation and our carbon footprint. There's also component parts around quality of life and the certainty that a business or a homeowner can kind of go, or even a renter, any resident can kind of go forward knowing with at least a relatively high degree of certainty that they're not going to have to rush home to get their kids from school when it's raining 2 inches, because you start getting the nature of everybody to run and get milk every time it snows. Take that and put it on steroids and multiply it by 20 is the kind of problem I'm sure that Trish sometimes runs into when she's thinking about it. And I know exactly, because I had a lot of constituents down on the Patuxent River that really were slammed by that storm as well. Not on the same scale in terms of breadth, but obviously a lot of folks did lose their homes down that way as well. But then the third piece is that economic development piece, I think, that Paul is talking about, is looking for that opportunity and creating pathways for that opportunity. And I think government plays a role in that. Obviously, in the end, we want to be facilitators of that sort of creation of economic development down the road, too. Let's see, I think the only other thing I wanted to remind, too, is I think in terms of exporting, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, a city with a real sense of its history in the same way that Rhode Island has it. I think, I unfortunately don't think Virginia is as forward-looking as I'm hoping Rhode Island will be able to be, but think about the technologies we may develop to help protect our cultural and historic assets here. Virginia, Richmond, other places like that, hopefully would also be able to maybe take those kinds of things and use them. So there's a real value to being forward-looking, thinking ahead. Mass and Connecticut are doing a lot of these things. We need to be doing these things, and I really, I'm looking forward to the opportunity this is going to present. It's almost forced, as it's going to keep getting noisier, it's going to keep happening along the way. But were there any final thoughts anybody wanted to throw out, put in outright? We don't need to. I just was more checking. Oh, I'm sorry. Did Sure. Oh, yeah.
And I guess we're just here to kind of support the bill, and it sounds like there's kind of a parallel that Trisha made about cancer. So basically, these storms are like a cancer, and what we're really talking about is prevention, right? Like a cure. And so my question is this bill is like a framework to start us on talking about how to address that, like how to go towards a cure. What can we do to help? I think we'd like to see it.
Well, Yeah, I think, I know you guys, some folks I know have already had a chance to see early drafts of the bill. I'm hoping that we'll have more chances to have big conversations around places you see shortcomings in the bill or you see great things you want to make sure you push and help folks understand are important. I've been meeting with folks, like I said, from all different sectors, the educational institutions, environmental groups, public health folks, business people, to try to get the word out about the bill, but also to get feedback on what would be most helpful in that sense of things. And I know, Paul, the one last I didn't want to forget was what you were telling me about the flood insurance piece, about what Newport is looking at to help drive down flood insurance rates for its residences along the way. Just because I think that's a good kind of closing point here to remind people that this is also something that can start helping people very quickly if the right kind of policies and things like that are put in place.
Well, there's two things. Newport is applying for the community rating service under the FEMA to try to bring down the insurance. But the other areas is, particularly after Sandy, the issues of insurance companies and the financial organizations, they're the ones that are actually, I should say, they're actually pushing for a lot of what's happening in resiliency and climate change after what took place down in New York City. So I think the opportunity is, in our innovation zone or in our point area, if we start to get it right and start to talk to the insurance companies, we're talking about the innovation zone being built specifically, like I think you showed that picture of that building, specifically to realize that it will be in a period of times flooded. If we start to build the innovation zone in that, and we start on the point, the cultural area, having the conversations from historical preservation and the insurance companies to say if new types of technologies, new types of sealing, if we put those into place, as well as we raise some of these buildings for elevation, can we have that discussion about long-term insurance? And personally, I mean, that might open up a lot larger opportunity for Rhode Island in their insurance, where so many insurance companies have stayed out of Rhode Island because of the ocean.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we a lot of times we get beat up because we get poor grades on these random scorecards that folks have out there with a variety of axes to grind, I guess I'd say, in my own my own soapbox kind of component part of that. But I'd love to see Rhode Island being number one or number two, right there at the top on being resilient places to do business, a place that you've got the state has got your back, so to speak, in terms of what's going to happen in terms of sea level rise and storm surge and heat as well, which we haven't even gotten into that much. I've got Bob Vanderslice from Department of Health, and I think I saw somebody else from Department of Health too. But we have to keep on thinking about this as a public health issue too. But it's really quality of life is going to be one of the core pieces that I want to remind people about to help people see how it affects them. But I think then on the other side of that, we want to make sure folks do see the opportunities, as Paul said, to take advantage of these things along the way. Louis, you had something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a final comment along those lines. There's a huge space for innovation in this area. Because the mindset has not been at top of mind for a lot of companies, they haven't developed products that will reduce these kinds of losses. So it is a huge opportunity for business development, for innovation in this sector. Now, what we do as a company is we don't develop products. We look at products that are available, we test it. If they perform up to standards that we can count on, then we will certify those products for a fee. Manufacturers then can use the FM diamond to show that they've been tested and certified. But we do then recommend those products and their installation or engineering standards to businesses. So we do a risk assessment, we come across a hazard, we say here's different ways that you can reduce that hazard and use any FM approved product. Because we know those products will work, we've tested them, we've certified that they work, and we continue to certify the manufacturing. So there's a huge opportunity always for products to come into that sector, to be tested, to show that they will perform in certain characteristics, and then we as a company will recommend them to our clients. Others, like the National Association of State Flood Plan Managers, has a huge list of flood mitigation products that they have. Huge opportunity.
And because I don't feel like I brought Brown into this equation that much, for folks to remember too, we also need to talk about energy resilience and electricity resilience and being more energy efficient, being more, really having a more modern grid generally is something that's also going to help companies and homeowners and residents all throughout the state be more resilient. And again, I think Brown's example is one also to help companies realize that again, being, thinking proactively about their carbon footprint also is, if they're really aggressive about it, they have a real opportunity to save a lot of money over the life of the time of them being a going concern along the way.
And just to add to that too is the state in particular, through the least cost procurement legislation itself, they're actually in efficiency programs actually is looking at microgrid technologies. How can we distribute energy systems out there so that they're available for folks instead of relying upon something that's literally hundreds of miles away to provide you with your power, and the fact that there's going to be something in that probability that says, well, that transmission line could be down, that distribution line could be down, the closer I get to where I need it. And so I think, you see that those types of policies that we have in place and need more of are going to only help us with that problem.
All right, well, on that, I want to thank my guests today, Trish Yadley, Paul Carroll, Chris Powell, and Louis Grizzo. Sorry, I want to make sure I get your name right, Louis. I really appreciate your time today. I'm optimistic that we're going to learn from the stories you're telling us today and the examples that you're giving us today, and I'm going to be pushing for this this year. I know I've had a lot of support from folks at Brown and other students from URI. We have a whole host of folks that have had input into what we're working on here along the way, and so I'm really optimistic that we'll be able to get some things to happen this year, but not just this year, but for the years to come too along the way. So thank you very much, and thanks everybody for coming.
Great, thank you.